You're listening to the SIP podcast, the Study Abroadcast, episode 12. I'm your host, Emily. In this show, we explore this world of study abroad, offering advice, insights, and travel stories, bridging perspectives and cultures along the way. On this episode, I'll be sharing my experience along with two other University of Guelph exchange students who studied abroad in Australia. Let's get right into it. Today on the show, we are pleased to welcome Elena and Zoe. To get started, Elena and Zoe, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your exchange experience?
Everyone, thanks for tuning in. My name's Zoe, and I'm currently in my last semester studying psychology here at the University of Guelph. In the winter 2020 semester, I traveled to Tasmania, Australia, studied at the University of Tasmania there, and now I'm currently a peer helper at the Centre for International Programs. I've wanted to go to Australia since I was 12 years old, so being able to travel and complete part of my degree out there was like a dream come true, and I can't wait to tell you all more about it.
So hi, my name's Elena. I'm in my 5th year studying neuroscience as my major and then nutrition as a minor. And I went to Australia, specifically in Canberra of the winter 2020, so like right when COVID started, which is always fun. And yeah, I've always wanted to see more of the world, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to see Australia since it is so far away. It would just make sense to spend a semester there.
I'm Emily. I'm a 5th year environmental biology student, and I went on exchange to Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia during the winter 2020 semester, the same as Zoe and Elena. Like Zoe, I'm also a SIP peer helper. And yeah, during my time there, I lived both in residence and rented a house with other exchange students in Melbourne, which was super fun. I did a lot of exploring in Victoria, which is the state Melbourne is in. And that was during the semester. And then I did some backpacking for a few weeks up the East Coast after the end of my semester. And yeah, like Zoe and Elena said, I chose Australia because I'd wanted to go there for probably most of my life. And I just thought like this is the perfect opportunity to spend a long time there since it's so far away. Most people, when they think about Australia, they think about beaches, surfing, and kangaroos. My experience in Melbourne was living a big city life with huge food, art, and music scene, but the beaches and mountains were still close by. Elena, what was your experience like in Canberra? Zoe, how about you in Tasmania?
Yeah, so Canberra, so the university in Canberra that I went to is Australian National University. I don't think I mentioned that before. And Canberra, I would kind of describe it as if Toronto had less people in the sense that it isn't as packed, but it still had that city feel, which I really like. And so because of COVID, I only spent like maybe a month or two actually in Canberra, and the rest of my time was spent traveling all along the East Coast. So I kind of got an experience of everything. I got the city life in places like Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and then also the more nature parts. So we did like snorkeling in Airlie Beach, or we would do hikes where we would see kangaroos on our hikes. They're kind of like deer there. I kind of got like everything, which is really nice.
Yeah, so I lived in Hobart, Tasmania, which is located in the southeast end of Tasmania on the River Derwent. So while it's the capital city of the island state with like its main harbor and historic neighborhoods, around 40% of Tasmania is actually protected in national parks and reserves, so there's tons of nature around you. When I walked out on my balcony in residence, I had a view of the water, and then when I turned, I could see Kunani and Mount Wellington, which is the mountain overlooking all of Hobart. So the amount of nature is actually what drove me to choose to study in Tasmania. I could do tons of weekend road trips, do so many hikes in my area. I can go to the beach after class, and I can still go check out the nightlife in the downtown area. So although the island seems a bit more separated from the mainland, there are still tons to do every single day.
What were some of your favorite spots to explore in Australia?
Yeah, so it's definitely a hard question. One of the coolest hikes I did was 16 kilometers down to the southernmost point of Australia. So this was the closest to Antarctica that I could get. It was actually like such an insane feeling, like seeing all the wind and watching the waves crash and how the terrain was so different at those edges. And then during one of my road trips, we stopped at Little Blue Lake in Gladstone. So it was originally a mine hole, but then all the water came through. So now it reflects this like crazy, vivid, aqua blue color from all the minerals in its base. And then another really cool lake that I saw was the Disappearing Tarn, which actually only appears on Mount Wellington after heavy rainfall. So you're almost 750 meters up the mountain, and there's this crystal clear water pool. And I think what made this so memorable for me is that we spontaneously hiked up the mountain to try and find it because it only occurs every once in a while after heavy rain periods. And as the name implies, it starts disappearing within a matter of days. So it was a pretty cool sight.
Yeah, so for me, I think as much as I try to like open my mind up to new things, I am a city girl at heart. And so I just loved exploring all of the major cities that we went to. So Canberra was a fairly big city, but then there was also Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne. And we would just spend like the whole day just walking around the streets, seeing all the architecture, all the history, all the cafes, shops that we don't have here, and just really taking in the culture of some of the most like biggest cities in Australia. That was super fun. And then, but also when we went snorkeling in Airlie Beach, we went specifically to the Whitsunday Islands. And so in this area, you kind of go up a hill. And so once you're up the hill, you can have this view of the ocean. But what's interesting about it is the tide is so low that sometimes the sand peaks up. And so what's cool about it is that depending on the type of day, the pattern of the water and sand is different every single time. And so every time you take a picture, the pattern will always be different. And it was just so beautiful there. It was probably one of my favorite days.
So yeah, for me, living in Victoria, there are always like so many national parks that were only a couple hours away from the city. So yeah, we did a lot of weekend trips. And I think one of my favorite ones was to the Grampians, which is a site of mountains that are a few hours from Melbourne. And yeah, I went there on a couple weekend trips, but yeah, I always went with friends. We went hiking. And yeah, the stars were so amazing there. I think one of my favorite memories in Australia was looking at the Milky Way with my friends at night. And it was just so quiet, and all you could hear were kangaroos like rustling in the bush. And it definitely it made me really emotional being like, wow, like I'm really here. Yeah, and then another one of my favorite spots in Victoria is a place called Wilson's Prom. It's kind of like an edge of the world sort of place, sort of what Zoe was describing at the southernmost tip of Tasmania. This is the southernmost tip of the mainland. It's actually relatively close to Tasmania, so I was like trying to look for the island when I was there. But yeah, there's just like countless wild, empty beaches that me and my friends explored for a weekend. Yeah, and it was just it was a really, really incredible feeling being there. And then yeah, I traveled up the East Coast after my semester ended, and there were so many amazing spots out there. It's a bit of a backpacker's paradise. There's the Great Barrier Reef, where I went snorkeling. There's the Daintree Rainforest. I went camping there. Yeah, lots of crocodiles. So that's something to watch out for. Yeah, and then yeah, there's so many spots in Australia. I can't even pick a few. How did you get around your city, and when you did other sorts of travel?
Getting around Hobart was actually pretty easy. There was buses that came to my residence that could bring you many places. Like they actually brought you some of them up to the mountain. A lot of them went to the popular hikes and then to the downtown area. One thing that I learned the hard way though is that the buses there didn't actually say what the next stop was. So you kind of had to keep track of where you were and when you were getting off, and then just notice what bus stop number you were at. So that was something that I learned the hard way. I got lost a little bit, but I also made lots of friends there who had cars, or they had rented cars. So oftentimes if they were going to go grocery shopping or downtown, they'd message a group chat for our whole residence and see if anyone needed to go with them. And then on road trips, they'd bring their cars and we would all pitch in for gas, which they call petro, and it worked out perfectly most of the time.
So where I lived in Canberra, my residence and even the campus of the university was pretty central in terms of like the action of Canberra. So that's like where all the grocery stores are, where all of like anything that you need. It was pretty much in walking distance. And then if we needed to, there was also a pretty good bus system that we used. And which was actually cool about the buses there is that you didn't have to buy a bus pass. You could just pay with your credit card, which actually came in handy quite a few times if you forgot your pass, for example. And then once we started to travel along the East Coast, we did have to take a plane 2 times to get from Canberra to Brisbane and then from Cairns to Melbourne, just because Australia is actually big. I feel like people don't really comprehend how big it is, but you can't just like drive from like major city to major city. So yeah, we did that. And then yeah, once we started our road trip, we did rent a car, which is honestly like the best way to go if you're planning on road tripping or anything like that, just because it just allows you to see so much and go to these like tiny places where you couldn't otherwise if you were relying on like public transportation, for example.
Yeah, so in Melbourne, there was a really good public transportation system that I used to get around most of the time. So yeah, there are a lot of buses and a really good tram system, which had lines that went like everywhere in the city. And it was even free right around the CBD, which is like the central part of the city. Yeah, and so most people had this thing called a Mikey card, which is basically just a public transportation card. Yeah, so that was mostly how I got around the city, which was really good. And then when I went outside the city, like Zoe and Elena said, we rented cars and just split the gas, which usually worked out just fine. Or I had some friends who had a car there, so that always made it a bit easier. Yeah, and then other parts of Australia, I flew to Sydney from Melbourne. And then from there, I took a lot of buses and trains up the East Coast. But then in some parts, like where the public transportation was a little bit less accessible, I rented a car or like traveled with friends who had cars. But I think going up the East Coast is a lot easier using public transportation than other parts of Australia, just because there's a lot of travelers there and a lot of backpackers. So I'd say it's more easy taking buses up there than probably anywhere else. I think I would have a hard time relying on public transportation going much out of the city in Victoria. What were some of the events that your host university put on for exchange students?
UTAS had tons of events put on for exchange students. While the exchange student office had an initial information session to introduce us all to each other and give us the rundown about living in Tasmania, studying there, the city itself. They also had barbecues throughout my time there, so we could all meet up and then just stay in contact with the office as well. I lived in accommodation too, like I mentioned, and they also had tons of day trips during the first month of me living there. So I was able to meet other exchange students, but also some other domestic students. And so one of the first events I did was actually a camp, and I was so happy that they did this because I was able to finally cross this off my bucket list. And then here, I made other friends who wanted to surf more. So we ended up renting boards for the semester and making a surf group to go together. And I definitely suggest joining in on some of these events because you'll meet like-minded people and you get to go adventure the city with them too.
Yeah, so my university was the same. They did hold like an information session, or like even an orientation, which also included like a barbecue and stuff. And then there was also a night where it was like an international student dance night kind of thing. I wish I took more advantage of any events that the university put on for exchange students, but unfortunately I didn't. So I don't know too much about what went on. But that's mainly because what my group of exchange students did is we had this Facebook page that the university created. And then from that Facebook page, a WhatsApp group was created so that all of us exchange students would join the WhatsApp group and we would kind of plan days for everyone to meet up. So when most of us were there during the orientation week before classes started, there'd be a few people that would say, hey, me and a few other these people are going to the lake and we're just going to hang out and meet people. If anyone wants to come, like just join us. And so that was kind of how I met other exchange students, was through this group, not necessarily events that the university hosted.
Yeah, so at Deakin University, where I went, they had sort of an exchange orientation trip, like in the first week of school. And so they organized a trip for all the exchange students. We went to this small surf town called Torquay, and we all stayed in these cute little cabins along the coast. And yeah, we just spent like those, I think it was 3 days, just learning to surf and getting to meet other students. We all went for dinner, and we all went for hikes, and we were like biking along the coast. So yeah, it was really nice just arriving there and then having this sort of trip right away just to get to know people, and all the other exchange students there like in the exact same boat as you. Nobody knows anybody, so you bond really quickly with all the other exchange students. But yeah, I wish, like Elena said, I wish I had taken advantage of more of the events that were put on by the university. I think when I got there, I was doing a lot of like road trips and weekend trips with students who, yeah, and we had a similar WhatsApp group, and we just, planned to do stuff and meet up with other students all the time. That I think I wasn't paying too much attention to what the school was putting on, and I wish I did now, because they canceled them shortly after because of COVID, and a lot of Aussies went home. But yeah, I think that's probably one of my biggest regrets is not taking advantage of the events that the university put on for us. What were some of your favorite Aussie traditions or slang that you learned during your time there? Is there any specific slang to your city or region?
I still actually use some of the Aussie slang that I learned while I was abroad. And it's funny because while Australians speak English, people always say that with the amount of slang that they use, it may as well be another language. I still call McDonald's Macca's. And my friends, they always laugh at me. But I remember always going to Macca's to get some McFlurries with all my friends. So, and then I remember one time a new friend I met had asked me to go for a frothy that arvo. And I remember I had to pause because I actually didn't really realize what they were asking me. So when I asked for clarification, they're actually asking me to go get a beer that afternoon. So you'll get the hang of the slang quickly. Just ask for clarification if you're unsure. But for the most part, it's pretty fun learning new ways to say things and then just kind of sharing these differences between our cultures and how we talk.
Yeah, I had the same sort of experience where someone said something to me and I was like, what? Like I remember going to, so like Target is like their main, like one of the main stores there. So I went to a Target when I was first there buying like pots, pans, stuff like that. And when I went up to the cash register, she says, hi, how are you going? And I was like, what do you mean? Where am I going? And it's just, I learned apparently that that's how they say, how are you there? But at first that really kind of like rattled me. I don't know if you guys heard that at all, but instead of saying, how are you? They say, how are you going? So that was kind of interesting. And yeah, I also heard Arvo a lot. I also noticed that people actually use I reckon a lot, like to say like, oh, I reckon that so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. Or they'll also use the word heaps a lot instead of saying like many or a lot. So instead of saying there's lots of things to do, I've heard a lot of people be like, there's heaps of things to do. And it was just these like small differences that I think they are probably widespread throughout Australia and maybe even Tasmania. But yeah, it was just so cool to like hear these small differences in the way that we speak.
Now that you guys are bringing up all these slang terms, I'm now realizing that I still use a lot of these, and I kind of just like forgot that they were Australian slang, because it's just kind of fun to say. But yeah, I think it's just fun. Like they sort of just shorten everything. Like I think you guys said like they say arvo a lot of the time, like, and it means afternoon. I definitely was thrown off the first time I was asked how you going. But now I think I just say that all the time, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I still say Macca's. It's just easier. It's honestly just more fun. There's like the Bottle-O, which is like the liquor store. There's Mozzie, which is mosquito. Those are just a couple that I thought were quite fun to say. In terms of traditions though, I think I'm a bit sad that I didn't get to experience too many traditions because COVID hit and so many things were canceled, especially in Melbourne. They shut things down pretty quickly. So a lot of things like seeing like an AFL game That's something that I really would have liked to experience, especially being in a big city. I know that's huge. So yeah, when I go back, that's definitely a tradition I want to experience for sure. How do you feel studying abroad in Australia enhanced your education?
I feel like studying abroad can help you expand your academic horizon and develop the capacity to adapt to various educational settings. Adapting to different styles of teaching can also help you adjust to different management styles. And I feel like this makes you more versatile in the workplace. And this is something great that you can bring up in a job or volunteer interviews to make yourself stand out more too. Also, while I was abroad, I could take courses that I couldn't take here at Guelph. So my favorite course that I took was Human Behavior in Extreme Environment. And here I was able to learn from scientists studying Antarctica, ex-cult members, astronauts, military families, and people that were displaced from natural disasters. So taking new and different courses is actually one of the best things.
Yeah, so I think my goal was to take classes that Guelph didn't offer, but honestly, then I just thought, you know what, let me take some easier classes so that I can really focus on exploring Australia, just because I know myself as a student, and just taking easier classes that, may be offered here as well would just work better for me. And so in that regard, I didn't really like enhance my learning or anything. But I think what did help me from being there was being able to stand out. Because you're going there all on your own, you kind of have no one to fall back on or anything to fall back on. You're kind of put in the situation where you're forced to engage with people and make connections and stuff. And so I think this ability that I kind of learned and grew to like adapt to while I was there can and help my education in terms of like making those connections with people, not being afraid to approach people if I have a question or if I just have something random to say. So in that sense, I think this exchange experience has really been beneficial to me.
Yeah, so since I'm studying environmental biology, having the opportunity to learn about environmental issues that were specific to Australia was really important to me. Yeah, just sort of gaining that sort of global perspective on what I'm studying was probably like the biggest thing that I took out of my exchange experience, especially considering that I would eventually like to live and work abroad, and maybe that would be in Australia. Sort of gaining a more global perspective on environmental issues is really important to me. Like here in Canada, I would never really learn that much about sort of the bushfires that were going on in Australia and the bleaching of coral reefs. So yeah, and just being there and learning from people who actually experienced that, and learning, even just seeing in the news there how people were being affected and how people were dealing with it. Yeah, it definitely helped me gain a more global perspective on environmental issues that are going on. What would you want students who want to study abroad in Australia to know before they go?
I think one of my biggest pieces of advice is that I think everyone should definitely research Australia or any place that you plan to move to and complete a study abroad semester. Like research things like the weather, the current currency exchange rates, the daily cost of living, things to do in your area or your campus. Just so you're prepared, because I realized that when I had gotten to Hobart that I had no idea where the closest grocery store was or how to get there. So thankfully the accommodation staff and other students were able to help me out and point me in the right direction, and I actually got a ride with some of them there. So that's one thing that's awesome about being an international student, is that majority of people and students realize you aren't from the area, and they're more than happy to help you and educate you on certain things. Australia is an amazing place, and I can't recommend studying here enough.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. That's all super important. I know one thing that I did before going was kind of map out where my residence was, and like the distance it would take me to get to all my classes. And I found that that was really helpful, because when you're going on exchange, you don't really have an opportunity to tour the campus at all. Like if you were here in Ontario, you can just go to one of the universities here and take a campus tour. So I found that really helpful. And then one other thing that I would say is like, it's not just applicable to Australia, it's applicable to anywhere you go. I would say try to be there early. So don't show up like in the middle, like even in the middle of orientation or right when classes start. I found that me arriving, I think it was a couple of days before orientation actually started, was really helpful in the sense that I got, well, first of all, I got over the jet lag, which was like a big issue for me. But then I also, got my place settled. I got my mental health settled, preparing for this big life change. And then also arriving early, I found it a little bit easier to connect with other students who were already there because of that group chat that I mentioned. It's just a lot easier in the beginning because right at the beginning, everyone's looking to make friends. And so I think if you get in there earlier, especially if anyone is like shy, kind of like me, it makes it a bit easier to be there right in the beginning, so that it's like kind of easier to meet new people since everyone is starting at the same place.
Yeah, so my advice is a little bit different, but yeah, if you can, I would advise students to try to budget for traveling past the end of your semester and outside of your city. Australia is a massive country and it's so far away, and there's not too many chances you're going to be able to be away and travel for months on end, so you definitely want to make the most of it while you're there. So yeah, my biggest piece of advice is definitely try to make the most of it while you're there, because it will go so fast and all of a sudden you'll be on your plane back home, and you don't want to regret not seeing as much as you can. Well, that's all for today's episode of the Study Abroadcast. Don't forget to explore your own study abroad opportunities on the SIP website, uaguelph.ca/SIP, or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Our Instagram handle is CIP_Guelph. Thanks for listening, and thanks to Zoe and Elena for sharing their advice, insights, and travel stories. Stay tuned to our next episode where we look to unpack the study abroad experience even further.